As promised, we're back. Penelope's still asleep, and she's probably going to be crashed out for the rest of our time here. So lying, obviously lying is about as human as any other kind of behavior that we observe. Doubling down. Now, I don't know what's happened. In the last decade, it seems like we live in a world of double down. Right? And we see this in the media all the time. We see people say something, and rather than just do the obvious, simple thing, that is, people say something bad or something that's interpreted poorly, and the easiest thing is just to say, you know what? I don't know what I was thinking. I must have been tired. I must have been distracted. I said that and I didn't mean it. And I apologize to anyone and everyone I offended. What I really mean is this, right? Own it, correct it, and move on. Right? But instead, what we see, no, people double down, and we've moved past the world of double down to the world of triple down, and people just look ridiculous, right? They look inflexible, and it just denies any form of critical thinking. So maintaining one's initial position in spite of conflicting evidence or rebuke. We just saw someone on 60 Minutes who was questioned, and they said, well, this happened, and they said, well, there's no evidence that it happened, and it's like, well, I don't need evidence, because it happened, and it said, but we operate on evidence. Well, it happened, and you know what? I'm going to walk out of here. And it's like, well, so much for that conversation, right? I mean, own it, move on, right? And say, you know what? If I said, hey, this is the way the world worked, but, the information I got and the way I looked at it was incorrect, and I made a mistake, and I guess that didn't really occur. And you know what? Sometimes we all make mistakes, and this is one of mine. So there we go. I'm sorry. And I hope it didn't influence anyone to any great degree. And from now on, I'll be more careful about the way I interpret information. Or I'll better vet sources of information that are coming at me. There's a lot of ways we can own it and don't even have to take complete responsibility, if you will. Right? But people with high fragile self-esteem can't do this. High fragiles will double down, triple down, quadruple down. Right? But notice when you double down, then it increases your difficulty of floating future apologies. The wondrous thing about apology is forgiveness. And every major religion in the world clearly delineates you have to accept responsibility before you can be offered forgiveness. I've done research on forgiveness, and that's a component from every religion. So do we want to appear hard-headed and unable to learn from mistakes? If that's the impression we're trying to create, then double down. But it also supports a winning versus learning strategy. Okay? So you can tell I'm not a fan of double down, and I'm really kind of uptight about it. So let's pick on some waffle words. What do we know? My personal pet peeve, I already told you I'll try. Notice, that's a trigger for me. It's also a trigger because it's a waffle word. You're going to do it or you're not going to do it. Right? Don't give me I'll try, this nebulous gray area that leaves you an out. Commit or don't. Right? And this is where I want to see what are some of yours, what just pushes your buttons. So let's, on your team, provide some waffle words, provide a brief explanation for what the user is attempting to escape taking responsibility for. And notice, trigger words, right, aren't necessarily waffle words. Now, waffle words can trigger, but trigger words don't have to be waffle words, right? Got it? All right. So, let's talk about email. Subject line is awesome if it actually pertains to the message. So, when you write me an email, write in the subject line, right? You'll notice for class announcements, I try to put in the subject line what the message is about, and then I explain it. So it's not just, hey, an important announcement. No, it's an announcement. The announcement will say, midterm 2 pushed back 1 week. And I might even include why, but maybe not, right? So try and let people use their time effectively. Make a complete subject line, all right? So salutations are important. Get it right. If you want to address an email to me and you want to say, "Dear Mark," it's gonna come right in, and I'm gonna accept it without even thinking about it. Isn't that nice? If you prefer Professor Polifroni or Dr. Polifroni, then go ahead. Write that. If that makes you feel the relationship is better or more important or whatever, I'm okay with that. The one I don't like is Mr. Polifroni. It's not an appropriate salutation for me anymore. I'm not a Mr. I'm a doctor. Mr. went away when I got my PhD, which I worked very hard to earn, right? So I'm a doctor. So be careful. And I've noticed a couple of my female colleagues really get this much worse than I do. Miss or Mrs. And it's like, no, they're doctor, and they're doctor, and they busted their ass being a doctor, right? So please make sure that the salutations are correct, right? And what you're allowed to say. One hint is look at how they sign the email to you. And notice, when I send you an email or I respond to your email, I sign it almost invariably take care, because I just like that closer. Sometimes I'll do sincerely, but most of the time it's take care and then Mark. And what that means is, it's okay then if you write me back saying Mark. That's okay in my book for most people. Your signature, what does your signature line say about you? What does it communicate about you? Do you use different signatures for different contexts? I do not. My signature is the same because I don't want to get confused about what signature I'm supposed to be using at any given time. I think a refined signature that is more context specific is probably a better way to go than I do it. But what does it say about you? And I'm okay with everyone knowing my signature, because it's basically the core of my identity is I'm the senior lecturer at Ohio State, right? Now, let's talk about memos. They're not just communicating information. Memos are received by an audience, and we look at the central arguments. At least we hope that people read the memo for the central argument, right? Remember the elaboration likelihood model. But then what is the format? Are there misspellings, right? Are there grammatical errors? And that can have judgmental consequences. Mistakes can create an undesirable impression. Poor spelling, etc. Tone can create unintended effects, so be careful of the tone. And read memos before you send them out. Third-party review prior to publication can circumvent many potential negative consequences, and I hope you guys avail yourself of this. My wife and I both do this with each other. She's a paralegal par excellence, right? She's a senior research paralegal at Nationwide. She is a very good writer, and a very specific and very critical writer, right? So I often will, you know, say, hey, can you read this over for me? And she'll read it and say, what are you trying to do? And I'll explain what my intent is, and she says, well, then in this case, you might want to change this, etc. She's very good at that. And occasionally she'll toss something towards me, but it's more directional from me to her. Find someone to review, right? And especially if it's a difficult email, then find someone who can maybe take a look at it and give you an impression of how it might come off. Because you know how you intended it, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be received that way. So mission critical stuff, maybe get someone to help you out. Texting. You guys are the experts. I'm going to leave you to this. I still text. I know, it's pathetic, right? So I text like that. I don't do the two things. I can type fine, but I don't text, right? You're the expert. What could possibly go wrong? Let's make a list. And let's have some fun with this. How about 2 genuine texting boo-boos or faux pas, if you will? A brief explanation for each. So I'd like to see that as element D of homework 13. Now, the unsaid, verbal omissions when noticed can be extremely telling. That is, what people say is fascinating, but what they don't say can often mean almost just as much, right? And good listening skills help reveal omissions. It's like, oh my God, that's interesting that they were talking about this, but they never said anything about that. I wonder what that means. I wonder what their avoidance of that is attributable to, right? And situational knowledge can enhance your ability to detect significant omissions. Now, your parents might have done this to you and caught you in some lies, or not lies, but those sin of omission lies, and they're like, okay, so what did you do? You know, and they're asking you, they're querying about your weekend, your day, your night, etc., and they're really focused on what you're not yet saying. So that's a good skill, and that represents good critical thinking. What are these people not saying, right? If someone presents this wonderful drug, right, with all these wonderful effects and how all this curative power, but then they don't tell you about side effects, that's an omission, right? So you say, well, are there side effects? Why are they not discussing those? So what are the downsides? People often communicate the pros but fail to mention the cons. So now the unsaid can sometimes be elucidated by nonverbal leakage, that is through body language. So in clinical sessions, right, but even in just our day-to-day togetherness, pay attention to body language and see if it's conflicting with what's being verbally said or if it's indicating something that isn't being said, right? The desire to disengage from an interaction can be indicated by foot position. I'm not going to tilt the camera, but one thing I've learned is that if I'm standing face-to-face talking with you and my feet are directed relatively towards you, I'm engaging in the conversation. But if you see someone's foot turn, right, away, that is to the side, what that indicates, right, is the body is actually getting ready to leave, right? So that turn has already been started. So you become sensitive to foot position as one indicator of when to break off a conversation. Maybe the person would really like to finish the conversation. Check their feet out now and again, and if they turn out, say, you know, well, I'm glad we had this talk, let's continue later, and let them go, right? Instead of making them uncomfortable with you, and that's going to develop a negative association necessarily. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Goffman. So Goffman, what do we know about Irving Goffman? Well, he's a sociologist par excellence, very much in tune with theory about human interaction, and also the presentation of self. So a couple of his books, Interaction Ritual, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, these are about kind of the sociological forces governing how we relate to each other, but it gets almost social psychological. So when we see sociology and social psychology, there's this beautiful area kind of overlap where both can inform each other. So let's talk about avoidance in the corrective process a la Goffman. Avoidance involves avoiding discussing certain topics in order to maintain positive face. That is, boy, I don't want to talk about this because then it's going to cause conflict and someone's going to suffer as the result of this conflict. So topics that can lead to argument can result in anger, frustration, and anxiety, and the idea is, as part of our interaction ritual, we may decide that these are topics to be avoided, right? So we often suppress feelings within conversation, and we have an idea of how others might react and potentially support or argue against, right? So the corrective process, if we blow it and we say something that turns the conversation south, whether it's a dinner party, whatever it is, right? Goffman highlights this ritual that needs to take place for everyone to be restored, and it's this corrective process, right? So it can be employed if someone didn't avoid a topic and they threw some gasoline on the fire, right? Or you know, you've been in that situation where you try to avoid a topic and someone just keeps pushing it up there and pushing it up there and pushing it up there, and suddenly you have to respond, and then the conflagration occurs, right? Here's a four-part corrective process, the challenge. So the person may call attention to the infraction committed, and especially if you're dealing with assertive people, they'll say, I do not find that kind of language appropriate, or I do not like to listen to others refer to those people as such and such, right? And it's like, so now the challenge is put it out there. It's like we have a violation of our conversational ritual. Something has occurred that is making people in this conversation, at least myself, uncomfortable. So the offering, now, does the person being challenged, they're offered the opportunity to apologize for the infraction. That is, hey, here, I've assertively described the infraction, your move. What's going to come now? I've paused, right? And so if the person bites on it, so to speak, they may then begin to offer an explanation, and that's so they want to re-establish the expressive order. And they may say, you know what, I was just joking. Wow, I'm sorry, I was just joking. And we know from the joking thing that, no, that might have been very serious, but now they're at least going to try and not own it by saying they were joking. Or, and I know I've used this one maybe more than once, is, you know, maybe I just had one glass of wine too many, and it kind of loosened my lips, and that was something that I didn't mean, it just popped out, right? And we know the problem with that excuse, though, is the wine just diminished the inhibitory process. What came out was probably genuine, but this is to just get everyone back together in the little party, right? And then they offer an apology, a promise not to commit the infraction again. You know what, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put a damper on the dinner party. From now on, I'm going to stop at my second glass of wine and call that good. Maybe take a break and have a diet soda. Okay. Now, 4-part process, so we got to go a couple more. Restoration, the offended accepts the apology or act of reconciliation. Hey, I know what you're saying. It's happened to me too. I've done the same thing. No worries, huh? And this is the ritual offering acceptance. That is accepting the potential apology. And then thanks. Then this is the often hidden 4th part. Then the offender, the person who committed the faux pas, then says, you know what, thank you for being so understanding. And now closure has occurred, and we're kind of back to normal. And Goffin explains that the emotion is central to each of these steps in the ritual, and kind of guides us through the ritual. This is a prototypical process. It might take a difference. But now look at the challenge, right? I may call attention to the infraction, and let's go back to double down. At this point, the person doubles down and said, look, I meant what I said. And if you've got a problem with it, that's your tough shit. Right? That would be kind of the doubling down at this stage, and notice that the corrective process ritual is now short-circuited. It's run off the rails. It ain't going to happen. So, owning it as a source power, admit one's mistakes. It's actually a tremendous sense of power. But notice people, especially with high fragile self-esteem, can't do this, right? But be secure in your self-esteem. Be okay. Be willing to allow yourself to make mistakes as part of a natural process, and then even a more natural part of the process is to apologize for them. I'm sorry, right? So when one admits one's mistake or their misspeak, right, the ability to have it used against oneself, if you've owned it, said, boy, I really screwed up. I don't know where I was coming from when I said that. I didn't even mean it. But now it's very difficult to use it against me. Because I've already said, you know, and if someone says, well, yeah, and you say, yeah, I know. What further can I say? I was wrong. And notice, you're really pulling the wind out of their sails. You're diminishing their power. If they wanted to attack, every time that you admit it, there's less and less that you can be attacked upon, right? Notice also that one more readily learns from the error or the misjudgment by owning it. Hey, it was mine, and what I'm actually interested in is how did I manage to upset you so severely? Because I really don't want to do that again, right? And I'm really sorry. I'll apologize again. And again, you are then moving into the power position in this even when you messed up, which is pretty cool to think about, right? One is positioning oneself for forgiveness, as we talked about earlier, and one is likely to be viewed as demonstrating courage, the courage to accept that you made a mistake and to admit it, and that's courageous. Because we're afraid of the repercussions of that conversational mistake. And remember, courage requires fear. Fear has to precede courage. There is no courage if we're not afraid. And if you like that idea, Psych of Emotion, we explore that. In fact, maybe today, tomorrow, I'm going to be doing the lecture on courage. So, courage is a fascinating construct. Let us move on to listening skills. What can we do? Speak less. Appear attentive. Attend to your body language. Eye contact. Use eye contact, just the right amount, not too much, not too little. Mirroring, that is, allow your body to mirror the other person's body. Empathic mirroring, that's something we do naturally, most of us. And acknowledge. Continue to acknowledge, nod, Paraphrase when appropriate, as we described. Seek clarity, ask questions. Remember, these are the kind of Carnegie techniques that we described in the earlier. And avoid the desire to jump in if you can. That is, just let it go, let it flow, and don't look anxious like you're waiting for your moment to interject into the conversation, because then it looks less like you're listening. Right? And if you're with people that require you to jump in, then you might start considering, why do I hang out with this person if they don't give me equal billing on the conversation? You know, one of my good friends from graduate school, I don't like to see much anymore, because I show up and it's like I just present an opportunity for them to talk 90% of the time. And after a while, it just gets uninteresting, right? And it gets boring, and it's not fulfilling, right? I'm not on this planet for them to converse at, right? So, types of listening: there's competitive or combative listening. I'm listening for something that gives me a leg up on them. There's passive attentive listening, and there's active reflective listening, where we offer right, and engage in the paraphrasing. So, after listening to a conversational partner and they're clearly finished, couple techniques. Okay, let's see if I understand. Right? Repeat back to the partner, but use your own words. Don't be a parrot, right? This isn't about mocking or mimicking. This is about demonstrating you understand. And the best way to do that is to paraphrase. Attempt to match, mirror the vocabulary level and the degree of formality that someone's speaking at, right? So make that consistent to the extent you can. And then ask, did I get it? Am I right? Verify the correct interpretation. And that's about all I got for you today. For this one at least. Communication is a fascinating aspect, and skilled communicators become very popular and very well liked, and they actually then are better at transmitting messages, facilitating learning, facilitating relationships. So I think communication is one of the most important skills that we can practice as animals on this planet. Is the ability to communicate with each other, and the ability, you know, not just human on human communication, but I've learned a lot from cats and how to communicate with cats. I know it sounds ridiculous, but there's a lot to be gained by becoming an increasingly effective communicator. And it doesn't mean that you need a fancy vocabulary. It doesn't mean that you have to be spiffy. It doesn't mean that you have to be free of stutters. And it doesn't mean any of that. It means more than anything to follow a few simple rules, be genuine, and show people that you actually care. Be mindful. And we keep getting back to that. And that's going to increase everyone's wellness. And with that, let's say goodbye. And in fact, who's going to say goodbye? Kyle's going to say goodbye. So a couple versions of Kyle there. And say Kyle. See you later, Kyle. See you later, guys. And thank you for spending the time with me.